Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Unarmored Talk podcast. It's been a couple of weeks. You guys know I post an episode every 2 weeks. And before we get into the next topic with this amazing guest, don't forget to subscribe on the YouTube channel or leave a rating review on Apple, Google, Spotify, whatever's your favorite platform. I cannot get better unless you guys let me know what's going down. And you guys saw in the beginning, and if you didn't see it, I'm going to tell you, Robert Miriam, they're not just sponsors. I've been taking them, Cell Centrals for about a month and a half. I feel great. Some people go, what's the secret? You look good, Mario. I'm like, take care of and Dave and I just talked about this, but take care of myself. And I take a holistic approach, and thank goodness to Robert and Miriam Norris at takechargeyourhealth.usana.com. They've been helping me out, me and my wife and I, if you will. You want to learn more, go to host at unarmoredtalk.com. Email me there. We can talk offline, or you can go to takechargeyourhealth.usana.com. Learn more. Enough about that. Welcome back, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, an amazing guest who's willing to remove his armor to help others. Dave Roberts. He's a professor. He's an author and many, many more things. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Mario, thank you for having me as a guest. It's an honor to be here. I am excited, and I'm just ready to go. I'm ready to take off my armor and just let it out.
Yeah.
Put it all out on the table.
Let's take it off. And like you and I were talking about the pre-show, Dave, I cannot wait to get that coffee mug to you. So now we can have cups of coffee and cups of conversation without armor. Thanks to Nicole Fields, my lovely bride, who made us an amazing new logo. So, Dave, thank you so much, my friend.
Well, you're quite welcome, Mario. I'm just, like I said, I'm just happy to be here.
No, thank you. So can you tell the listeners and viewers just a little bit about yourself, Dave?
Yes, I can. I live in upstate New York, in Whitesboro, New York. I live with my wife, Sherry. I have two grown sons, Dan and Matt. Dan, who lives in Oswego, New York, and Matt, who lives in Colorado. I have a daughter which will probably be the subject of our show, Janine, who transitioned on March 1st, 2003, at the age of 18, of alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma, a very rare and aggressive and incurable connective muscle tissue cancer. She transitioned 10 months after giving birth to her first child and my first granddaughter, Brianna, who is now 20 years old and has gifted me with a great-grandchild. So that's another category of my life. Before the field of death and dying actually found me, and it did after my daughter Janine's transition or passing, however you and your listeners choose to conceptualize death. I worked for 27 years as an addictions counselor and a clinical supervisor at a state-run agency in upstate New York, in Utica, New York. I am an adjunct professor of psychology and psych child life at Utica University. I've been there since 2003. I teach 1 or 2 psychology courses a semester and regularly 2 sections of death, dying, and bereavement, where my students know my history with loss. I'm an author. I recently, with the Reverend Patty Farino, published a book on Amazon called When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister. It was published on March 1st, 2021, and March 1st was the day of my daughter's passing or transition, and we wanted the rollout for the book to be on that day specifically. Right. The book is essentially about a spiritually transformative experience that Reverend Farino orchestrated with me, for lack of a better term, or guided me through 7 years after my daughter's Janine's transition, that helped me find peace after my daughter's passing, helped me realize that the spirit is well alive, that our consciousness survives after death, and that we can transform the relationship by creating continuing bonds. Our subsequent conversations and we are still having those over 12 years, helped me realize that we can integrate psychology and spirituality together to help individuals and transcend loss. So, and also the book there's a message for the younger generation about the importance of critical thinking.
Right.
So that's been my most recent accomplishment. And we've gotten great reviews about the book. And I met Reverend Patty through pure synchronicity, through events that would defy any type of rational explanation. But, it's like, it to be true, even though there's no scientific evidence to support how we met. It was just a series of synchronous events that brought us together at the time we were supposed to come together. And I've been a workshop presenter. I've done keynote speeches nationally. I've done workshops nationally and locally. My passion today is teaching, working with young adults, helping them find their voice. I consider my students to be an extension of my own family. And the Utica University, the students, the staff, and the faculty, they gave me the energy to move on, especially in early grief when I could not move by myself. And I have a deep and abiding love for that community, for my students, and their efforts in terms of bringing me literally back to life have helped me commit to service to try to help other individuals who have had loss transcend that. And it doesn't have to be the death of a child. It can be I work with whatever the person's worst loss happens to be.
Right.
And that's where I meet them where they're at. And and hopefully I can give them a perspective that will give them hope and will allow them to move through grief.
Dave, first of all, congratulations on being an author. I mean, I believe that that's one heck of a journey that takes a lot of effort, focus, and commitment. So again, I salute you for that, and thank you for the wonderful, brief insight into your life. So, and let's just jump right into the topic. The one thing, listening to you and getting to know you over the last few months, that you've even helped me with is for me, no one prepares you for after the loss, right? After the death of a child or a friend, or in the military, and I was in the Marines, or the death of a brother or sister in arms. But listening to you, how, what are the skills and how do you find joy after not maybe one loss, two losses, or even one loss could be very detrimental, very devastating. So talk to us about what was your journey like, and how did you start to develop skills where now we're looking at Dave Roberts at, what are you, 32, Dave?
Yeah, 32. Very good. You can have me back on again, Mario, for that very flattering estimate of my age.
But if you're, talk to us about that journey, man.
It was a journey unlike anything that I've ever taken in my life.
Yeah.
Parenting books on child rearing, they don't even begin to prepare you for what life is like after you experience the death of a child. I was a therapist. I had been a therapist. I was a therapist when Janine got sick. I was a therapist when she passed away. When she transitioned. And I thought I was very good at helping individuals negotiate their own traumas related to addiction, or, trauma that contributed directly to addiction. But I'll tell you, I didn't have a clue in terms of all my training, all my education. I also have a master's in social work degree.
Wow.
None of that.
So you were, that was your profession.
Yeah. And if anybody had said to me, geez, you're a therapist, they should help prepare you to deal with the unthinkable, I would have looked at them and said, walk in my shoes for a day and then we'll have another conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Because I read a book a long time ago by Tom Kreider, and I forget the title, but it was like, he said something in there. His daughter had died, I believe, in an apartment fire. And he had said something, he felt like a beggar in winter. I think it was crawling through a box, I'm paraphrasing this, finding a coat that would fit. And for me, the death of my daughter threw me into a world that was foreign, that was terrifying, that if I looked in the mirror, Mario, I didn't recognize that person looking back at me. That's how drastic my life had changed. I
Wow.
felt disconnected from myself. I felt disconnected from the world around me. I felt sad. I felt lost. I felt angry because I thought I should have done more to prevent my daughter from getting sick. Because as a father, one of the things is that we pride ourselves on is taking care of our families, protecting our children and our spouses from any danger. And for 3 years, at least 2.5 to 3 years, I beat myself up because I couldn't do that.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Did you ever go through a phase, man, when Dave, you just blamed yourself? Like, where did I fail? How did I not see something, or what? Did you go through that?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the year that before Janine got sick, when she was pregnant, the tumor was located in her right foot. And we thought it was complications from pregnancy. Her foot swelled really, really a lot. And we thought it was edema from the pregnancy. We didn't even think of cancer, Mario. That was the last thing in our minds.
Wow.
And particularly sarcoma types of cancer, which in this area is something that they had not seen. And so eventually, after Brianna was born, she got an MRI of her foot. They found an undefined 8-centimeter mass in the bottom of her foot. It turned out to be a malignant tumor that had metastasized. She had stage 4 cancer with bone marrow and lymph node involvement. And what we were told by the oncologist is that short of a miracle, and I'm paraphrasing this, short of a miracle, because there was no cure for her disease, there was no cure for her type of cancer. The only hope that we had was her cancer going into total remission until they could find a cure. And it never went to total remission. It went to 80% remission. And then it remetastasized. She decided at 18, she goes, I'm done with treatment. So we called in hospice services and she transitioned at home. And so, I mean, look, going through all of this, I went from the joy of being a grandfather. I had also recently graduated with my MSW degree. You want to talk about life turning on a dime and the range of emotions? I went from joy to satisfaction of accomplishment to now being terrified, knowing that my only daughter, whom I loved with all of my heart, was not going to be a part of my life. And so you want to talk about, and so, yeah, I did a lot of blaming of myself. I was angry. I was sad. I was angry because I was focused on school and not being able to see what was going on sooner. I blamed myself. But in early grief, in looking back on that anger kind of gave me some energy to get through a lot of different moments. That anger also in some way kept me connected to her memory. I didn't forget her because I was angry that I let her down, that I thought I let her down.
Yeah.
But with work, with the help of my bereavement support group facilitator, Sister Rose Troy, she helped me realize that I couldn't have done anything else. Because I told her, and this is something that I told her, I said, I'm angry at God because he took the person I loved away from me. And so she looked at me, she goes, what if God is just as upset as you are? And that stopped me right in my tracks.
Wow.
I said, I had to think about that. And so I said, let me look at this from that perspective, that what if God was as upset as I have been for my daughter's transition? And I started thinking about it. I said, and even though I had trouble kind of making sense of all this, I said, I think he is showing me that type of compassion, because I think I can kind of sense I was getting some signs of my daughter's presence.
Right.
And in retrospect, I still couldn't make sense out of where science fit into my science-based background at that time.
And here you are with a science base as the professional.
Yeah.
And that's just amazing how grief can, things could do that.
Yeah. So yeah, it's and she helped me get through that. She helped me realize that I did the best I could given the hand of cards I was dealt.
Yeah.
And that one statement caused me to shift my perspective in terms of what if God was just as upset as you are? Looking at it from that perspective, my anger was able to kind of just dissipate, it became more manageable. And I honestly began to realize that God or the universe was becoming an ally in my grief journey, as opposed to somebody who had just randomly taken a daughter that I loved, with all of my heart, my only daughter. And I got two great sons. But, it was like, that was, she was my only daughter, and it would hurt. It hurt. We had a close bond.
Yeah, and you mentioned too, Dave, that you were also a new grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe that was your daughter's child.
Yeah. Yeah, 25 years old. I was a new granddaughter or new grandfather, at 25.
Man, wow. So here it is now, you're a new grandfather, you're having some success in the academic pathway. And then you lose your
Yeah.
only daughter. And oh, by the way, she can't even raise her own child, if I'm hearing it right.
Mm-hmm. She did the best she could. She bonded because there was a point where the chemo, and I look at this as a gift from the universe, a gift from God, whatever you believe.
Yeah.
That she had some energy. The chemo was effective enough for her to help have her spend some time with her daughter, spend some time with her significant other. By the way, they all lived with us. Her significant other, Brianna, Janine, my two sons, or my one son, Matt, 3 cats, and me and my wife, we were all in just a single level ranch living together, because her significant other was going to school at the time.
Right.
He was working, and we had offered them to come in and live with us until whatever was going to happen next, which we were hoping was a cure, obviously.
Yeah.
And he finally said, yeah, because I can't do all of this myself. And I said, I don't blame him. And he was 19 at the time and had a tremendous, really a mature sense of responsibility. And he was with her and lived with us for 4 years with Brianna after Janine transitioned. So that tells you what kind of a young man he is, and
Right.
he still is. And so yeah, it was like I said, quite the journey.
And so now you have this turning point, and what a powerful question, by the way. I'm going to use that. Mario, what if God is just as stressed out as you are?
Mm-hmm.
What if God is just as upset? What a powerful question.
Yeah.
And so as you hit this kind of turning point where now you're thinking through things, and now you're starting to take that energy and that anger. Talk to me about where did you start to put all of that effort and energy towards?
I started to put it towards writing. I had an opportunity to write some articles for a couple of magazines. I put my energy into bereavement support, trying to help other individuals who had experienced loss, try to share what I had learned up until that point, to try to provide some camaraderie, to try to provide some universality so that they knew that they weren't alone. And one of the other turning points for me was walking into Sister Rose Troy's bereavement support group and seeing 18 other parents who had experienced the unthinkable. And at that point, I just felt totally isolated for a lot of different reasons. And when I walked in there, I didn't feel isolated anymore. There were parents that were at different stages of grief, phases of grief. They were 5, 6, 7 years along, and I was able to learn from what they did to help them get to that point. So I was able to incorporate that along with other perspectives and pass that on to other individuals who were.
So here you are thinking, man, I'm isolated. There's no one that of that's going through this, and then you go into this, grief support organ, and there's a lot of people, not exactly in your same situation, but still similar.
Yeah.
And with your experience and what you went through, and then some of the amazing people I believe you had a chance to interact with, what would you say is the number one thing or a thing you saw with people who didn't know they were grieving?
A lot of times, and this is what I saw, was them almost buying into society's expectations about how grief should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And essentially many in Western society, we're getting more comfortable talking about death, but death isn't a topic, Mario, that is routine dinner conversation. You can go into Eastern cultures and they understand that death is a part of life. So they're going to use that knowledge to try to live a meaningful life, in the moment.
Right.
And they're going to use that to try to live their best life. In this incarnation of themselves. Because as you know, many religions and cultures believe in an afterlife. They believe in reincarnation. I believe in afterlife and reincarnation. I believe in all of that now. I didn't before, 19, but believe me, my perspectives had to change. I had to take a look at everything that I believed, everything that I stood for, and I said, what goes, what gets modified, what gets added. And that's where Patty was a great help to me. She exposed me to different types of spiritual perspectives that got my scientific mind very curious about how I could add those beliefs into my system, into my core beliefs. And so that's the other thing I think that individuals struggled with, is that if I add different perspectives, do I have to abandon my core beliefs? No, grief isn't about that. Grief is about expanding your beliefs, changing your perspective so that you can work through grief, transform the relationship with your loved ones, and accept that you're living in a world where your loved one isn't physically present, but where you can still create a continued bond with the essence of who they are and carry that with you for the rest of your life. But the other part, and I kind of jumped around a little bit.
Oh,
I
no worries.
apologize
No, Dave, please.
Okay, I jumped in, but getting back to that, it's like I've had individuals literally have come up to me and said, somebody came up to me at 6, and I've been 6 months after my son or daughter's death or passing or transition, however they choose to conceptualize their last moment of physical life, and said, well, it's 6 months and you're still crying. Don't you think you ought to stop? Or it's been a year. Don't you think you ought to stop grieving? And this comes into society's perception that grief is time limited, that we start at day one and we end at 12 months, and then we move on with our lives as if nothing has changed.
Right.
As if but no, I mean, any loss that we experience changes the landscape of our life, changes who we are, causes us to reevaluate our priorities. It could be a pet loss. It could be the loss of a child. It could be the loss of a spouse. It could be, it could be anything that shifts our perspective. Okay. Here's another thing that I wanted to share with you as far as perspective shifts. This is what Patty taught me. So this is one of the things that was just so profound to me. At the moment that my daughter passed, she passed at 12:30 on March 1st. I was laying in bed trying to get some sleep, and I knew she was in the active phase of dying. And I remember this because my sister-in-law came in, and we had everybody here. It was like, it was like Woodstock. We had people laying on the floors.
Right.
It was we had the hospital bed in the living room. So my sister-in-law, Diane, comes in and says, Dave, you better get up. It's time. So I remember, and I think it was my wife, Sherry, who was holding Janine's hand. And I held Janine's hand, and she took 2 rapid breaths, and then she passed. And I always tell Patty, I said, I was the last one to see her alive. And she goes, well, what if you looked at this differently? So she did a very similar piece to Sister Rose, but with a different setting. What if you were the first person to introduce her to her new existence? What if you were the person that facilitated that transition from her physical life, this life, into eternal life? And I looked at that and I said, and I'm getting a chill just talking about this. Mm-hmm. I looked at that and I said, why did, I said, wow. And I still remember after 19 plus years, the last day of her life. I can give you every detail of the last day of her life. But now when I look at her moment of, I look at it as a moment now of transition, where she transitioned into a new life, into eternal life, where she was pain-free, where her spirit was free to roam. And that was the one of the many things that Patty taught me. And we talked about that in the book as well, too. So that also helped me shift my perspective. But a lot of times individuals will buy into well, this is how you have to grieve. And there's no right or wrong way to grieve. You can grieve, you can do a faith-based approach, you can do a spiritual approach, you can do a non-dogmatic approach, as long as it works for you. Who am I to say which way to grieve is better? And it's not time limited. What we look at is progress. How are you moving from the raw pain of grief to a point where you're accepting that you can live in a world without the physical presence of your loved one? Now, acceptance, Mario, does not mean that you don't yearn or grieve for the physical presence of your loved one. It's been 19 years, and there are days that I want Janine here physically. You know, there are days that I yearn for that. But I realize that that's going to be part of my experience of life. I've learned that I can be fulfilled with happy moments, that I can also learn from the sad moments, from the moments of yearning, from the moments where I truly miss her, that they all have something to teach me. And that's a part of life, is when we can experience the total spectrum of emotions and learn from that, be affected by it, and help others in the process as a result of that. And that's the other thing, is that the people here, well, I got to be happy. Well, no, you don't. I mean, do you know anybody that's happy 24/7? I really don't. They'll tell you they are, but hell, they ain't happy. You know, they're not. I mean, but it's just something that, well, society says I'm supposed to be happy. Well, no, you can be sad.
Right.
There are gifts in the sad. Some of the saddest people I know are the most compassionate souls I know. You can be angry as long as your anger isn't destructive. That anger might give you energy to get through another moment. So embrace it all. Embrace it all for what it can teach you.
And I love, Dave, how you mentioned how you made a choice. You actually changed the way you thought about what was happening with your daughter and what happened. And how that decision to choose the way you thought about the situation improved the outcome of not her coming back, but through, the outcome of what could have happened to you after her transition and passing. And which is, because that's Unarmored Talk. It's about developing a accurate way of thinking to change, potentially improve the outcome. Looking back, Dave, just taking a look back and going through that journey where you were angry and you had some other emotions, you gained a better understanding of grieving. You weren't isolated. When you went to the meeting and saw 18 other parents kind of in similar situations. Looking back, what is one thing, if you had to pick one thing that you learned about yourself, and what would that be that you really learned about yourself, and now it's made you a better, grandfather, husband, person, professional? What would that one thing be if you had to pick one?
That's tough, because I'm going through the register of my mind trying to pick one. So, one of the things that I've learned is that the past orchestrates our present. And you hear a lot of individuals talk about live in the present, live in the moment. I believe, Mario, that is important. Mindfulness, there's a place for mindfulness. But think about how you got to your present. It was everything we did in our past that orchestrated our present. And that's one of the things that I learned, is that once I began to understand from a not so much a human law perspective, but a sacred law perspective, that I can maintain a relationship with my daughter's spirit.
Right.
I started looking at everything else that I had attached a human label on, and started saying, how can I look at this from a sacred perspective? So what happened with my daughter and the work I did as a result of the challenges with my daughter's passing or transition was to look at everything else that had happened to me. And particularly as it related to the relationship with my father and my mother. My father had left when I was 5 years old, left me as an only child, for my mother to raise me. And my mother was very overprotective, and she basically, she just, she really kept a tight rein on me. And I was resentful at that for a long time. I was resentful at my father for abandoning us. I was resentful at my mother for, keep me on a short leash and not allowing me to explore. But as I began with Patty's guidance to do some work and also engage other spiritual teachers, I realized that my father came from a family background. And I believe, Mario, that our DNA, our family history is inextricably woven into our DNA. But we can change that as we have the power and can be empowered to change our perspective on grief. We can do that. Grief requires that we wallow in the muck of our sadness and experience that. But then eventually we got to wallow through it, or else, if there's no movement, then you're looking at, profound depression, profound and incapacity to be able to engage in life and a disruption in daily functioning. But as long as there's movement, it doesn't matter how long it takes, as long as there is movement to that point. And that's what I want individuals. Time is relative. Just look at baby steps, look at the progress that you're making from day to day.
Absolutely.
No,
go ahead, Dave.
So here's what happened. I through pure serendipity or synchronicity, again, a first cousin on my father's side found me. And my father's originally from Baltimore, and she gave me the whole cue on our family history. And everybody in the family, there was a history of alcoholism. There was a history of mental illness. There was a history of men in that family that could not give emotional attachment, that if they were asked to give emotional attachment, they would just leave. My father could not change his history. He tried. I think he truly loved me and my mother, but he just couldn't do it. And he left, not because he did not love me or my mother. He left because he did, because he realized that he was just going to drag us down. And I began to understand my mother's decision through, honestly, a session that I had with a shamanistic holistic practitioner that cued me into a past life experience where I, as a 4-year-old, this is my interpretation of this, I had died as a 4-year-old and my mother wasn't there to protect me. So somehow our souls made a contract in this life that we were going to do it again as mother and son, and she was going to protect me at all costs, regardless of if it angered me. But she was not going to let me go again. She was not, that was her contract with me, was to protect me. Once I began to understand my father's actions and my mother's actions from a sacred rather than a human perspective, then it changed everything. And I began to realize that I worked with, working with individuals with addiction. If there was a history of addiction in my family, which there was, and I didn't know this until I was in my late 50s, maybe 60, realizing this is why I was drawn to this population, because of the history that was a part of me, was a part of my DNA. And then I began to, with Patty's encouragement, to embrace other perspectives, particularly Native American teachings of animals and nature, in terms of what animals have to teach us. And what I described was honor the past as your teacher, the present is your creation, the future is your inspiration. Jamie Sam's Crow medicine. That's Crow medicine.
Yeah, no, that's intriguing how, how you, when I asked you to self-reflect, and essentially, you brought up how your history, your experiences and memories created in your life really, really played a critical role in the way you processed and handled grief when it happened to you. And this is just amazing. I truly appreciate it, Dave. And as we get ready to as I get ready to take some of the things you said and implement it into my own life, and hopefully listeners and viewers do the same. If you had to give any last remarks to the listeners and viewers, what would you tell them?
First of all, be true to yourself in any journey after tragedy. Do what you're comfortable with. Honor what you believe, but also incorporate other perspectives in addition to what you already believe. I tell individuals, incorporating new perspectives doesn't mean you abandon your core beliefs. It's in it, as Patty also taught me, it's in addition to, not instead of.
Yeah.
In order for us to develop a perspective that's going to help us find peace and be able to manage our grief for the rest of our lives, we need to be able to embrace belief expansion and follow our own truth, follow our own, and be gentle to yourselves in the process.
Yeah, I think aren't we rough on ourselves?
Yeah, I'm my own worst critic. I'm my own worst critic with anything, and we are rougher on ourselves than we should be.
Yeah,
and a lot of times we think we may not deserve to be loved, but man, we were born with love. That's how we were born. We were born with love, innocence, and look at a child, newborn child.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for listening to another episode with Mario P. Fields, your host, and Dave Roberts. I truly appreciate you, Dave, taking time out of your schedule to come on the show and share an amazing journey with I believe very thoughtful skills that I'm going to use, and hopefully the listeners and viewers use, and hopefully they don't have to go through it, but we know how life is. Things happen, but God bless you, my friend. On March 1st of every year, the Fields family will pause to honor the transition of your lovely daughter, and please tell your two wonderful sons we said hello.
I will certainly do that and give my best to your family too.
As well. And not last but not least, your lovely bride. That we know that's the commander of the house.
Yeah, she reminds me of that occasionally too. That who's driving the bus, and it's her. And once I began to realize that, marriage was easy.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. God bless you. Be safe out there.